Know that you're everything that you need to be, but not all that you can be. I had a great conversation with Justin George from Kadus Group in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada today. This conversation unwrapped a story around how playing the long game, which he learned from his father, and the emotional and all-in authenticity from his mother, who shaped who Justin really is, and how he incorporates that into business, which makes it truly impactful and in turn creates ripples and betters the pond. Please eavesdrop on our conversation. I must admit, it was truly awesome. My name is Warren Berry, and I'm your host and the founder of Instinctive Solutions. And get ready to take a deep dive on the Better the Pond Pondcast with my guest, Justin George. So, Justin George, I met you in Ottawa for your Tech Canada meeting. Let's give out a big shout out to Sue Hamid,
Yeah,
your chair. You were
yeah.
the winner of the illustrious James Pond Award, and right, because of your genius, your brilliance, your input, your enthusiasm, your engagement, it was all there that day. And I said, you know what? Here's a guy that I have to get on the Better the Pond podcast. So, Mr. Justin George, it is absolutely great to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'd say more enthusiasm than genius, but I appreciate the comments.
It was fun. There was a lot of enthusiasm. I know how you roll. So you're the CEO and founder of Cadus and out in Ottawa. You have
Yep.
an office in Toronto.
hmm
And I kind of looked at a little bit of your history of sort of how things have developed over time. So before we get into about all about you and how amazing and how awesome you are, why don't you tell me a little bit about your company? Tell me about the organization and the things that you guys do.
Yeah, we're a new company. So Kadus Group, for your listeners, you can go to kadusgroup.com, find out about what we do. We're a boutique firm focused on development advisory and development management. And my background is, 25 years in real estate construction and development. So we had this idea that if we bring people together that have done really big things, but they cared about sort of purpose-driven outcomes, that we could really move the needle on projects. So Cadus Group's tagline is building a better tomorrow. And we're passionate about taking all of our skills and expertise and experience and channeling that into working with clients that are trying to create more affordable housing, or clients that are trying to move the needle on environmental development.
Hmm.
We do a lot of work with nonprofits. We do work with government. We do work with private sector as well, but particularly those that are trying to achieve big, bold, and ambitious things. So we help them as their advisor, and we also see projects from start to finish as a development manager. And we're in the process of also formalizing more of a capital business that creates seed capital, early stage capital for projects that are trying to create purposeful, impactful outcomes.
Love it. So it's interesting to see, you brought a bunch of people together with a shared purpose.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of background. How many people did it start with, and how many people are you now?
Well, that's an interesting question because there's more to that. So it started with just me, and the company was George Partners. So I fell into the evil trap of it being about you and your name, and I wanted to have my own company and drive the agenda. And about 6 weeks in, I realized that's not really what I want. I like working with people, and I want to do things that are bigger than I am. And so we went through a process to bring in several new partners and go through a rebranding as a partnership.
Mm.
And it was just a beautiful, amazing, seamless exercise that could have been really adversarial and difficult. And we were getting into like shareholder agreements and new structure and a new name for the company and a new mission. And so it was our first big test as a new partnership group. And we had it all figured out in like 45 minutes. Like we went through a bunch of names, we picked a name, we picked a mission, we picked like where we're going to focus. And that was great. And it's been a wild ride since then. But the decision to go from being kind of me to a broader group was 100% the right thing. And everything's flowed from there. So we basically have four partners and a group of 10. So we've got, a small business. Most of the staff is in Ottawa, though we have a couple of people in Toronto. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
So it's interesting how you said that you started on your own, so very entrepreneurially minded, right? I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to go on my own. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to build something around me, and it's going to be all about me. And I don't mean that from an egotistical standpoint. I mean that from an entrepreneurial standpoint.
Yeah.
And but it's within 6 weeks you figured out that this isn't what I wanted. That is a very, very quick turnaround.
Well, I would say I figured it out in 6 minutes, and it took me 6 weeks to actually like realize I had to turn the ship. And I wouldn't say I am naturally that entrepreneurial. I mean, my backstory is my father worked for the same company for 43 years, and um, always, always encouraged me a lot. I had a lot of self-belief, self-confidence as a kid, was driven to do lots of different things. But in the work context, the message was stability, corporate structure, climb the ladder, you can do great things. And then combined with that, in my early 20s, I got married very young and had two children. So my 20s were about
Mhm.
like family and stability and work, becoming, corporate leader. And I didn't really feel like I had the luxury to be overly entrepreneurial. So that came a lot later. So when it came, it was like, it's my name, it's my business. Like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to make up for what I felt was probably it took too long to arrive. And that was a gut reaction that, again, as I say, maybe it was a little bit more than 6 minutes, but it was clear to me pretty quickly that this was kind of the first step in a journey that would evolve to be more than just an ego project or about me or my experience, and particularly with the mission that we had to create impact. It couldn't be about me. Like it just couldn't. So yeah, that changed pretty naturally, to be honest.
Yeah, the thing about your dad, I'm going to actually unpack that a little bit. I'm not going to do it now, but I'm going to weave it in because I think it's a really interesting point that you bring up. So
Right.
this is going to be fascinating. I love it. And I love the fact, like, yeah, it took me, well, it wasn't really 6 weeks or 6 minutes. So, isn't it fascinating how you can just change your mind on a dime and go in a different direction and be okay with it, right?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about myself in that vein. With some of your guidance, and we can talk about that a bit later. But I've learned that I'm good at building things while the train is moving. Like
Yeah.
that's how I work. I have to try something and see how it works. And I, in my younger life, was very, I would say, close to being sort of a perfectionist and very OCD, and a lot of that was perhaps external influence that wasn't truly who I am. And what's become more successful as an entrepreneur is try something, evolve it, shape it, change it. And it starts very broad, and then over time it gets much more narrow.
Mhm.
And it's been successful. And I also have the work ethic and the hunger and the motivation. Like I can grind on something and turn it around in a very short period of time, so we can get a lot of progress. And that's been a learning curve. Like it doesn't need to be perfect right away, but it can be close enough, and then you can shape it.
Yeah. Done is better than perfect.
Done is better than perfect for
Yeah.
sure.
So,
Showing up is better than perfect. Like show
yeah.
up every single day. Yeah.
No, I think that's really I think it's fascinating and it's interesting. Well, we will unpack this a little bit about just how sometimes how other people shape us. As I said, my opening line when I'm speaking is "Get a good government job," she said, which was the advice the well-intentioned and really horrible advice my mother gave me, because it really drew me in a direction of exactly what I didn't want, but that's what she wanted, right? So well-intentioned, just really poor advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well intentioned, I think, is the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And I've
So
had all of that. Yeah.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit. about you. So I want to know, Mr. Justin George, what got you from being a gosling? So I'm like, where were you hatched? Where did you begin life, right? As a gosling, where'd you start your life out? And to when you came to leave the nest. So this is gonna be, I think it's gonna be fascinating because you said by, in your early 20s, you're already married and have a couple of kids. So,
Mm.
and leaving the nest can be either that you decided to say, you know what, I'm gonna fly out on my own and I'm away I go, I'm gonna soar, or sometimes you're just either gently nudged out of the nest or you're kicked. So
Yeah.
everyone's got their own story. And to where you are today. So Justin, what's your backstory?
Yeah. I mean, how long do we have? It's going to be a 2 hour long podcast. No, so I grew up in England. My accent has gotten mixed up along the way. Certainly, most people think I'm either from New Zealand or Australian, but I grew up in England. I grew up in a rural village in Yorkshire, and had a pretty good life as a kid, to be honest. I mean, I think my parents were very focused on, um, you know, giving me lots of opportunities and encouraging me to do things. And so I played sports and I did music and arts and all sorts of different things as a kid. And I think I grew up with a strong sense of self-belief and self-confidence and
Mhm.
that this idea that I could do anything, conquer anything. And so they certainly gave me a great start in life from that standpoint. And I was always a kid that was, wanting to accelerate through life, like wanting to be 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead, wanting to be 2 years older or 5 years older. And that was the theme. Like I had a lot of freedom. So I was always from a young age fairly independent and would travel on my own and would go places on my own. And so leaving home at 17, 18 was not a big deal. And went to university in the UK and then sort of approached an employer and said, listen, I really want to do something different. I don't want to be working in my hometown. So, like, show me what you've got. And they parachuted me into the Caribbean for a couple of years. So I worked in the Caribbean as a young person. But in amongst all of that, what was interesting is moving around for my career. I worked in the Caribbean. Moved down to London prior to the global financial crisis and was working on some great projects in London and was parachuted, did some time in Copenhagen, did some projects there. In amongst all of that, I had met my wife, who was a fair bit older than me as a young man still in university. And so I had gotten married to my spouse and started to build a family whilst I was also kind of moving around doing all these career things. So it was a great time in my life, to be honest, but it was not a traditional 20-year-old sort of period of your 20s where people are no responsibilities, focus on social life and your career and come home and eat pizza and stay out late. Like that wasn't my 20s. It was give everything you got at work, come home, you got a wife and a newborn at home, and it was busy. And so that I think has shaped my later years, but it was certainly part of this like I always wanted to be ahead. Always wanted to grow up quickly. I wanted to have family. I wanted a big corporate job. I wanted, the big house and the car and all the stuff.
Mhm.
And you probably have many insights where that came from, but in some ways it caught up with me. In other ways, it gave me great life experience as a young man around like responsibility and work ethic and going after what you want and actually finding a way to make it happen. So it's yeah, anything I've ever done has always been yeah, I'm either going to do it 110% or I'm not going to do it at all. So 20 odd, married and kids and traveling all around the place and trying to do it all. That was my backstory.
Either I'm all in or I'm all out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
There's no halfway in between.
yeah, yeah.
So if you don't mind me asking, where did you meet your wife?
So, in amongst all of that, I took a trip and did some backpacking in Asia. So I ended up meeting a Canadian in Asia while I was still in university in the UK, and and then I convinced her, as I can do, to leave her life in Canada and come to meet me in the UK. Well, before I even had a job, and we were in love, and the world was our oyster. So I said, "Yeah, get your visa and come meet me in England." And she did that, and no questions asked. And she arrives in England as I'm graduating. And I said, "I'm going to figure out, job wise, what we're going to do. Don't worry." And so she had a job lined up in the UK, and I came back 6 weeks later and said, "I got a job in the Caribbean. How do you want to go to the Caribbean? What do you think?" So, so we moved around a lot, and it was always for, great life experiences and career opportunities. And I think that was the part of being young that I definitely embraced. Like there was nothing that was off limits. Like we had the energy and the enthusiasm to do it. And at the same time, we were building a life together and having children and all those sorts of things. So it was, which hasn't really changed. If you would ask my kids and my family now, like I'm still, life is fast and furious, and I have an appetite to do lots of different things with it. But it was, when in my 20s, it was a whole nother level. So
Well, it sounds to me by listening to a bit of your backstory that, what I hear from you is life is an adventure.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that was, my mother grew up very poor, and my dad grew up without having access to many opportunities. It's sort of a family that really the kids worked, and so it was something that as parents they instilled in me. Like you're talented and capable and confident. You can do anything, and don't ever put limitations on that. And it's really ingrained in me, and I'm super appreciative of them for doing that. I think that's a great gift you can give your children, is for them to feel like the world is open to them. And if only they try, they can experience these wonderful things. So I've always had that. And what's interesting is we'll come on to a little bit more, but I never felt as quite as much like that in my corporate roles as I now do as an entrepreneur. That's probably the biggest thing that's changed. Is becoming an entrepreneur, it's created this connection with how I feel inside to how I act in my working life. That the world really is open. There's no limitation on what you can do. You just have to have the oomph and the gusto to go and get it.
So, yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to unpack this a little bit because I think this is really fascinating, and I think it's really good information too for number one people, but even entrepreneurs. I'd like to look back, sort of a comment you made earlier about your dad. So, what did your dad do for a living? He said 43 years in the same job. So,
Yeah. So my dad, the preface to that is I've always really looked up to my father, but we're very different. So we're kind of like mirror image of each other.
mhm.
Dad left school at 15, no qualifications, and he took a job. Actually, story there is he grew up loving boats, and he wanted to be a lock master. So, the little house by the locks that the guy comes out and opens the locks and the boats go through, and he goes back and sits on his lawn chair and enjoys the sun. And despite my dad being incredibly hardworking, he's also got this kind of horizontal nature to him that the world is just his view of it is that it should be at peace, and it's there's no he has a very kind of even keel approach to life. So he wanted to be a lockmaster, and he went and applied for the job at 15, and they said, "You're perfect. You know a lot about boating and water and all the stuff. But we need you to spend the first 6 months in the office learning like the safety codes and the policies and all this stuff." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I don't want to work in an office. I want to be outside. I like boats, and I like sitting in my deck chair when the boats come through and stuff." And they said, "Well, sorry, that's the job." So he said, "Okay, I don't want to do that." So he went down the street, and there was, he's got an engineering mind. And there was at the time one of the world's largest aerospace manufacturers, it's British Aerospace, now BAE Systems, and he took a job on the factory floor making little widgets and things. And he ended up spending his entire career with BAE Systems, largely in an office as a project executive eventually. But he worked his way from the shop floor to project manager to project director, and he ended up 43 years with BAE Systems as largely a project director on large structural test projects for military aircraft around the world in lots of different contexts. So yeah, it's a story I think is a pretty inspiring one from that standpoint of sort of going in really at the ground level and having this wonderful long career with a great employer.
Excuse me. What's interesting is he said, from the beginning, it's like, well, I don't want an office job, and ended up working in an office job.
Yeah. Yeah. And he always sort of said to me, my dad was like generally a positive person and someone who his mantra was like make good out of a situation no matter what the situation. And he said it's not who you work for, what you do, it's how you approach it.
Ah,
And he loved his job. When I was young, he would work. We only had one car, so he would take his bicycle to work and back in the Yorkshire rain. If you've ever been to Yorkshire, it rains a lot. So it'd be pouring rain. He'd have his overalls on and take his bike to work so that my mother could have the car for the kids. Work 14, 15-hour days, come home, smile on his face, never complained,
hmm.
and did that for many, many years. And he was just like, we never saw work stress. We never saw frustration. We just saw someone who had a pretty fulfilled life. So there was a lot of lessons in that around like how to make good out of a situation, how to just get on with stuff and not complain too much, and then also how to sort of weather what was likely quite a lot of stress that he had at work that we never saw as kids.
So here's my question. Of all the things, there's a lot to unpack there, but again, we only have so much time. But if you were to look at your father and sort of narrow it down into sort of the number one lesson you think that you learned from him, what would that be?
Um, I would say there's a lot there. I would say it's probably that there's always always another day. It's like he was. I did a lot of competitive sports as a kid, and he was very involved in that, and we bonded over that. And his mantra was, you just do the best you can today, and tomorrow you try and be better, and the day after that you try and be better. And he was about playing the long game. And that's kind of how he approached his career. And I think that's really like visible in going from like a kid on the shop floor to a project executive. It was like, just try, and tomorrow should be a better version of yourself. And no matter what happens today, if you have a bad day or you have a bad performance in a competition or whatever it might be, tomorrow's going to be better. And you don't get hung up on it. You don't let it affect your psyche. You don't let it affect your sense of self or mood. You just keep moving on. And he lived that every day. And I would say I'm okay at that. But I took a lot of what I have from him on that side. So that side.
Love it. What about your mom? What did she do? And what would you say that was your number one lesson that you got from her?
So my mum grew up in a poor neighborhood in Glasgow. She's a Glaswegian, Scot. My dad's from London, so there was like this Catholic, Protestant, English, Scottish thing. They also met on holiday and had a whole holiday romance, and there's a whole story there. So she grew up in poverty, also left school without an education.
Oh, well.
Um, was when I was young, actually before I was born, she was a nurse, and then she stayed home to raise me and my sister, and then at sort of midlife decided, uh, I want to do something. So she set up our own daycare in the village that we
Mm.
lived in, ran that, grew that to having, she had a lot of kids, like 40 or 50 kids, sold it, went back to university in her 40s and became, actually, she had to go and do a high school first because she didn't graduate high school, and went and got a degree, outstanding honors degree, and then became a social worker. So my mum is
Mm.
the fire in the family. Like my mum is the is the push, right? My dad is the even keel, and my mom is the fire. Like, let's go and do stuff. And very driven, again, without necessarily all the tools as a young person. So she sort of came from nothing. And that's a lot of the things that I have in terms of my energy and my motivation to do things come from my mother. Frankly, she is the more entrepreneurial. My dad was get a job and just stick it out. My mom was always coming up with different ideas and things that she wanted to do. She sold her first business, then she went into basically impact work, working with children of abused families, and
Mm.
then she did a lot of work in palliative care and helping, help with the transition to the afterlife, families. And so very, very sort of emotionally driven, and had a lot of great things to give to people, including our family. But certainly it was the gusto behind our family life, and that stayed with me. That this idea that if you have enough for the right stuff, you can make really cool things happen. Um, and yeah, and I think having the two influences was the right balance, right? Because I had this very sort of stable ballast water, and a lot of the things I tried to exhibit early in my career were perhaps more on that side. And then now later in my career, I'm tapping into more of the emotional piece, which certainly comes from my mom's side.
Yeah. Sounds like just from what you're saying that she really pushed limits. I mean, if she's dealing with on the social work, she's
Yeah.
dealing with the worst, right?
Yeah.
And yet palliative care, you're right, like you're at the end. I mean, those are very big limits, and yet she pushed it.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say it took me a long time to do this, but she had to her personal life and work were one and the same. She was who she is at all times. She brought a lot of her personality and her social skills and her care and her energy and her emotion to work. And it was very empowering for her and other people around her. It took me a long time to do that. Early in my career, I didn't want to bring all of myself to work. And so I admire her for that. I will say I never fought with my father. I fought a lot with my mother. So emotion has two sides to it, but yeah, I mean, there's no question. And she was driven by helping people. And it started, she was a nurse, and then she ran a daycare, and then she was a social worker. Like she lived by her values. There was this theme of I want to help people. And she was passionate about it beyond belief, and she would bring that energy, and there was contagion to that, right? Like you feel it. And whereas my father was more about like doing a good job and being professional, and once you come home with your family, like your work is at work and you're focused on your family. I think my mom had a much harder time, particularly when she was dealing with palliative care, and
Mhm.
and also in child protection, disconnecting the two. So that we saw that as well, and we
Mhm.
saw the strain that put on her. So there's two sides to always being your authentic self, right? I mean, it's hard to turn off being authentic. So,
Oh, absolutely. And I agree. And I could go down that path a long way. But I just have to say this, Justin, is that you talk about your mom and passionate and driven and limits and idea creating, and there was a lot of energy. Would that be fair to say?
that's
Like
right.
there's a
Oh yeah,
bundle. So what I find interesting about that is that's the same guy that I met in the Tech Canada meeting in Ottawa.
right.
And that's why you're here today.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think as I said, with my mom, we would fight. And for many years I tried to be like not like that.
Hmm.
But it is who I am. Like I'm a lot like her. And I think what's interesting is you have pieces of your parents and your ancestors and what have you, but you also have a lot of learned behavior. And then you as the next generation you can be thoughtful about the things that you have, and you have to have self-awareness around those. And then you can also take things that you want to add to that and sort of shape it a little bit. And a lot of that stuff I took from my father, who, as I said, we're very different, but I had a lot of admiration for how he handled certain situations. And I think as a young person, I really learned that because I spent quite a bit of time with him. And now you combine the two, you have this energy and you have this drive and you have this. I'm naturally more of an emotional person, but I have this kind of ballast influence in my life that taught me a lot more on the process side, strategy side, decision making. So it can be a powerful combination when you put the two together, which I found throughout my career.
Right. And so I got one more question for you before I move on, is if you take what you just said and sort of package it up, and you're looking, how does that apply to what you're in Kadus Group? What are you doing today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really does. So we have two facets to our business. We're a real estate company. So we're in a high risk business that is predominantly dominated by a lot of emotional decision makers, I would say. It's an industry, whether it's construction or development or real estate transactions, there's a lot of egos there.
Mhm.
Uh, and I could be quite tempted to sort of lean on my ego side because I'm more sort of an emotional thinker. But in real estate, I've always had more of my father's influence, like
Mhm.
make decisions based on facts, model the downside, understand risk management, understand project management, understand process. And that was all learned. That's not my natural being. That was learned, but it's very effective when you're in a highly, somewhat volatile, high risk sector. The other side of what we do, though, is purpose driven. So we want to take, you know, uh, institutional level, sort of the best in class expertise and apply it to delivering purpose driven outcomes. So a lot of my clients, their business is not real estate. It's about caring for people. It's about providing community services. So we have to be able to relate to them in a way that is not numbers and stats and transactions. It's about people. And I've really enjoyed that in our business since we launched Kadus. And frankly, in my previous roles in the corporate world, that's the piece of it that I got the most satisfaction out. When there were real people involved, real projects, like real outcomes that were making a difference, it really got my juices flowing. And I could take this training and the pieces I took from my father's life and apply it to a situation where I could bring my emotion and energy and all the stuff that comes more naturally to me. And it was like rocket fuel. And that's really why we started Cadus. That was the whole thesis, like get energy around trying to do the right thing and bring in the highest degree, best in class expertise that frankly, often when you're trying to do the right thing, there isn't the expertise, right? There's the expertise trying to do things that are going to make a lot of money, but maybe aren't necessarily purpose driven. A lot of charities struggle to get talent, as an example. So
Sure.
we still have this mission to drive it in that direction. And the confluence of those two things has been hugely rewarding, but I also think successful in terms of our client feedback. So that they really do come together for me.
Yeah, I'm going to unpack that in a little bit. I think that's really fascinating. I think there's a lot there. So
Yeah.
the next question is, what's the number one greatest or biggest thing, positively or negatively, that's happened to you that's ruffled your feathers? And how did you deal with it?
Yeah, it's pretty easy for me to answer that. And I would say my caveat to that is this is a podcast that it has less to do with business and more to do with, sort of sharing real things from my life, which
Mhm.
is certainly not what we're always comfortable with, but I'm going to indulge it anyway. So the biggest thing that ruffled my feathers was going through a divorce. So as I shared, got married young, had a family in my 20s. met a great partner and had a lot of great experiences. And the reality is, you're pretty young at 21, and we met. I was 21, um, and I thought I knew everything.
Didn't we all?
And so we eventually moved to Canada. I was sort of late 20s when my daughter was born. My daughter was born, and we always knew we were going to move to Canada, and so we made that move after the financial crisis, which hit Europe pretty hard. So we moved here in 2010, and it was probably the biggest event in my life that hadn't gone that well. And it was humbling. When I look back at it now, I'd done a lot of things, and I'd always had this sense of, it's going to be fine. We're going to work through it. I had a self-belief. And when we moved to Canada, it was the first time that really wavered. And to be honest with you, I still don't quite know why, but I was fairly young. I was starting a new life in a new country. We weren't just visiting, we weren't just traveling, we weren't here for work. We'd made the commitment to come 3,000 miles across the world. And we had my daughter at the time was very young, and then we ended up having my son here. And those couple of years were difficult for me. I think I had my midlife crisis early, like as I do many things, I do it early. And so we eventually decided to separate. And so I was 28, divorced, 2 children, living in a new country, 3,000 miles away from my family. Good dad, but any parent going through a divorce is very difficult, whether you're on the mom's side or the dad's side. Have a lot of empathy for fathers, because I think fathers don't always get taught the skills early enough. So certainly as a young dad, in hindsight now, I relied a lot on my spouse for parenting. And so I was suddenly divorced, wanting to maintain a relationship with my children, have access to them, see them, be all the things. And I was in a new country, also trying to move my career forward, no support, no family. So that was big. That was like, divorce is tough and it's very difficult for everybody. And I really felt it for those few years. And so that was the first big, there's been other life events, not to go into all of them, but that was the one that I think I didn't feel like I could get through for the first time. Like, it was probably the first time in my life I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to get through this.
Right.
All the other times there'd been different things that happened. I always had the sense I'm going to get through this. I was thinking I'm going to end up not with a great relationship with my children. All these different directions it could have gone. So that was 2012. So we divorced in 2012. So I had 2 children under 3. And it was really tough. And there was a moment I felt sorry for myself, and I felt like, I could have made different decisions, and I had regret and all those other things. And I didn't know if I could get through it. And that lasted more than 6 minutes. And it lasted more than 6 weeks. It lasted for a while. And it was, I realized that I wasn't Superman. I wasn't equipped with all of the things that I needed. And I think it wasn't one single moment, but I think over that time, there was a maturing that happened that was, okay, you've got a choice. You can either just keep blaming situation or yourself or other people, or you can feel sorry for yourself. And the fears that you have about what your life might look like when you're older, and perhaps you don't have a good relationship with your children or whatever it is, well, then that's going to, you're giving that a greater chance of happening. Or you can adapt and learn and grow and suffer through it, and kind of go through that new becoming phase, and in a very messy way. It wasn't enlightening. It didn't happen overnight. In a very messy way, that's sort of what happened over the course of the next decade. So today, 12 years later, my kids are 15 and 13. I have probably a better relationship with them than I would have had I not gone through a divorce. I have a great relationship with their mom. We get along well. We have a lot of respect for each other. I'm a better father. I'm a better friend. I'm a better husband. I'm a better person. but it took a decade. It didn't take 6 weeks, and it took a lot of things that when I talk about like being an entrepreneur, I use the same language. It took a mantra of like, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to show up.
Hmm.
Like you don't have to be a perfect dad every time you have them. You just have to be there. And over time, you create this new relationship and this new context. You have to listen to your kids. You have to like have patience when you don't feel like you have it. You have to, want to develop a real relationship with them and not just have this transactional experience. And you have to learn new skills. You have to do all the things
Hmm.
that we all talk about in our lives. And so I'm very thankful of that experience. Like it was by far the most difficult experience of my life. And I think I'm now at the point where I'm very thankful for it because it did shape who I was and who I am, and gave me new skills, and it gave me insight, and it restored this faith that okay, now something really bad has happened and I can get through it, and I do have the right intention. I think intention came up a lot for me during that time. Like you're tired, maybe you don't believe in yourself, but you're showing up with the right intention because the what you value is important enough, and that was my kids. And I didn't always do it great, and I wasn't always patient, and I wasn't always they had a lot of like microwave mac and cheese, and um but intention matters, and I think people care about that, and that's what builds relationships. And so that was a real life-changing thing for me, and I'm very thankful for it in terms of where I am today.
I find that really interesting. I always talk about people with, we need contrast, right? Like, you can never really feel joy unless you feel true fear, right? You can't have one without the other. So it's interesting that as you let that pendulum swing, it's actually, there's a gift that's in there. It's just, are you willing to go and actually see it?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, in times of, I would have perhaps parented a little differently if that hadn't happened. But now with my kids, in times of like where they don't have self-belief, I see it as a gift. Like
Mhm. Yeah.
when you don't believe in yourself and you see this version of yourself and you can muster the strength and will to continue, or you get support from other people to continue, and then you see yourself coming out of that, you have the gift of seeing this prior version of yourself that didn't have the self-belief. And to me, that was a gift. Like I always had this strong self-belief, and it gets you through times. It's a bit of a cheat code. You can cheat your way through things because you have this strong sense of self-belief. And when it's taken from you, you suddenly see yourself in totally different light. And rebuilding that is like a new awakening. Like it makes you much stronger, and probably a lot more humility coming out the other side than perhaps you did beforehand. So yeah, I mean, I think adversity is a gift if you can approach it the right way, and try to instill that in my kids. And we try to be very open about things like that because yeah, you need those skills when you're older.
Absolutely. And as I said, and I was speaking yesterday, I said, no, no pressure, no diamonds.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you for that story. And I think that a lot of people can either learn something from that or definitely relate to what you just said. And through the whole divorce thing, they said, I went through it too, so I can completely relate to everything that you said. And I think that's very valuable. So thank you for that. Um, so as you know, because when we were out speaking to your tech group, is that geese fly with, 71% further and faster when flying in a V formation.
yeah.
My question typically is, what do you think is the secret to getting a team flying in a V formation? But I kind of like to narrow this into something you said earlier about your team and developing the team at Cadus. How did you manage, or how did, as the group managed to fly in the V formation, and what is that? What's the secret behind that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm still figuring it out. Is my
See,
first answer.
build the airplane in the air. I get
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I think there's two things. I mean, I think 10 years ago I would have had a great answer for you. Um, Today I'm realizing daily what my strengths and weaknesses are. And one of the parts of that is realizing that you need good people around you. So, moving from a firm that was my name to Kadus was about realizing that I can't do it all on my own and I need great people to work with. And then the second part was, okay, well, now it's all on me to create this team environment and to like nurture people. And I was like, hold on. Again, you can't be all things to all people. So I think it's a work in progress. I think I'm learning where I'm strong and where I need support. And I have a really great partner with Jennifer Murray. She's an owner with me in Cadus, and she's here in Ottawa. And I think the two of us work quite well in terms of strengths and weaknesses and balances, and the team benefits from that.
Mm,
In terms of team, I would say to me, there's sort of three things. There's like you do have to have a vision. I think you have to a team that is strong aligns around a vision, and
mhm,
we do a lot of that work with projects where we come in um, to lead a project as the development manager, and people think that we're going to come in and we're going to talk budgets and schedules, and we actually start with like alignment. Like, what are we trying to achieve? What's the vision?
mm,
You all understand it. Can you tell me what you think the vision is? Because when you articulate it, it could be totally different. Do we all understand like what's behind the vision? Like with some of our clients, the vision might be to create the center of excellence or this physical building that's trying to achieve an objective, but the what's behind it is people and
mm,
care and services and families and children and all the things. Do you understand why we're doing it? And we spend a lot of time upfront doing that. And we find that when we do that, you get much better project outcomes. You get way less conflict. You get way fewer surprises. You create an environment of safety for the team because they understand why we're trying to do it, and we all get aligned on why we're trying to do it. And then they'll share information that they wouldn't share before. They'll share things like, do you know what? This generator is going to cost us like $200,000 more. And they'll share it as soon as they find out, rather than trying to solve the problem, figuring out they can't solve the problem, sharing it at the end. Like little things like that happen all the time. So you get a lot more transparency. You get way less like I'm trying to win and for me to win, you've got to lose, that kind of
mm.
mentality. So we do that on projects. So I think you got to have a strong vision to align a team. I think the second thing is you got to be credible. So as a leader, and I've always put a lot of emphasis on this, I think you can't just sell the dream. You have to like inspire the team that the dream comes from a place of credibility and competence. So, like you have to know what you're talking about for people to follow you. Otherwise, it's just a dream, and they'll kind of give up on it once they realize, it's a great dream, but it's not really achievable. And you might want to have big, bold, unachievable goals. That's fine, but it needs to come from a place of you understand your industry and your stuff, I think. So you need the credibility. And then lastly, I think you've got to approach it with, this is the piece where I'm really growing, is like authenticity. So you have the vision, you have the credibility or capability, but if you're not authentic in how you do it, people are just sort of still kind of taking orders. And if you're not authentic in what you're not good at as a leader, then I think it's hard for people to really buy into it. So I'm trying to do more of that. Like we have a pretty big, bold ambition. We have the capability, but we've got to go about it in a credible way, an authentic way, sorry, so that we can actually, I think that's what makes you have fun along the way, right? Like good people, good work, but have fun while you're doing it. And that's about being authentic. So that's kind of the things that I'm thinking about. But as I said, to me, it's all trial and error. It's like I'm figuring it out, and I think you can only do the best you can. And over time, if you treat people well and you have some core fundamentals, whether it's those three or some other things, I think people will see who you are over
Mhm,
time, and they'll either want to follow you and work with you,
mhm.
or not. And everyone does it slightly differently, but you got to just be you got to be real about it.
It's interesting, and so when I was speaking to your group, I always say going faster is not about going faster. Going faster is about getting rid of resistance.
Right.
As soon as you get rid of resistance, you automatically move faster with less energy. I tie that back into the whole piece of authenticity is that when you think about it, when you are actually just truly authentic, when you are just yourself, just being you, and you're not putting on a mask, you're not putting on a show, when you're just you, how much resistance is there?
Oh yeah, it's like, I mean, that's when I when I'm having the most fun as well, right? Like it just flows.
Right. And if everybody does that,
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
really
it's definitely when I think about my earlier career, it's like polar opposites, right? To
hmm
now. I mean, we talk about it all the time in terms of we haven't um, in the whole time that Cadus has existed, we haven't woken up in the morning and put on like the armor or the suit to come to work, right?
yeah.
And some days I do put on a suit, but there's not like, oh, I'm getting ready to go to work and I've got to be this person at work. We want to create an environment where people come to work and they're the same person they were 3 hours ago when they
Mhm.
were sitting having their breakfast at home. They bring that person to work, they bring their authentic self because we want to do exactly what you're describing. We want to pull all these sources of energy that get lost when you're trying to like be someone else and hide yourself and remove the resistance, as you said, and just get into this flow state. And I think there's sources of energy that are really, really powerful that just don't get brought to work. People just don't bring them.
I
Um,
agree.
they bring them to like the hockey game on Friday night, or they bring them to going out with their friends or playing with their kids. And it's like, you know, immense energy that you could just do for hours and hours and hours. And then they come to work and they feel they're falling asleep at their computer by 10:15. You know, it's like so we don't want to do that. And I think what you're advocating for and describing is what it's all about, is just understanding who you are and
Mhm.
being that person and do more of that and less of the like, I have to put myself in a box and be a corporate soldier.
Right. And I always say you take yourself with you wherever you go.
Right.
Right. So,
For better
so
or for worse.
yeah, for better for worse. Yeah, exactly. We all have our warts and scars, right?
Yeah.
So um so when you look at yourself or as in Cadus, what are you doing right now to better the pond? What are you doing to make the world a better place? And what ripples are you creating out there?
Yeah, no, we are. I think we're doing a lot of things. Coming back to the mantra of taking expertise and applying it to things that are big, bold, and ambitious and trying to drive purposeful outcomes. But we do it in I would say, unique way. So, in our industry, what often happens is if you're a not-for-profit, let's say you're a community group or you're a seniors operator, and you have a project and you need to go and hire expertise to run that project, you go and hire a project manager and they basically take the project and they take it away from you and they go into their office and they work on the project in their office. And you get a report once a month. And generally, and I'm being somewhat generalist here, obviously, but generally, if you're the owner, you're asking a whole bunch of probing questions because you don't quite know what's going on behind the curtain. It gets very adversarial, and I wouldn't say it's transactional relationship, but you might, if you get the right group and the right capability, you might still deliver a pretty impressive project. But our perspective is that doesn't build capacity. That just solves a problem. So you had a project, you didn't know how to execute it. Now you've built this building. Okay, great. What we want to do is actually increase capacity by building expertise and knowledge within the system. So I think if we want more purpose-driven projects, then we need more people with the ability to deliver those projects. And that is way beyond my capacity to build out a company and a team. So every project that we work on, we try to build capacity. And that means we have to learn, we as the private enterprise have to learn about their business. So
Mhm.
we're actually learning about how a not-for-profit operates and how community group services particular vulnerable populations, how a seniors operator provides, care for very frail and elderly people. We're learning about that. So it's building capacity in the system with us. And then what we do is not operate in a vacuum for our clients. We don't take the project into a back room with computers and drawings and then just pump out reports. We work with them, usually with a key individual, but we do a lot of education up front, which takes more time. So we say, here's how we're going to do it. Here's how we're going to make decisions and how we want you to engage with it. here's a bit about how the industry operates and how to get best value and how to get collaboration. We educate them on it. We work hand in hand, and I'll get phone calls from the executive director or the CEO or like any time of the day. Hey, like I'm just thinking about this. Do you think this is a good idea? And we'll talk about it. We'll come into their organization. We'll workshop with their people. As I said, we usually have at least one individual that's actually like implanted into the project, and we'll
Mm,
build capacity with that person so they can become a project leader. And what happens over time is you end up with we're trying to sort of make ourselves redundant. So what we're not doing is leading a project, and when they get to the next project, which many do, they're starting from scratch again. We're actually hoping that on the next project, our role is diminished and they start to take more of a lead role. And on the third project, it's diminished even further, and now they're really leading it. And
mm,
that builds a lot of capacity, but it takes time. And then what we find through that process is when you meet with the client, one, we meet with them a lot more regularly. But when we do meet with them, the conversations are totally different. They're not, can you explain like that line item to me? Because that seems like a lot of money. It's not about that. They know all of the details. They're involved. It's about like, how can we do more? How can we be more innovative? How can we provide better service? How can we like, you know, add another floor because we feel so passionate about this. We're going to go do more fundraising. Like the conversations are totally different, and I think that's how we're different. And for me, it's like sharing our knowledge. We're not keeping it secretive. We don't. We try not to use a bunch of industry lingo that is exclusionary, which the industry does a lot.
yeah.
And we want our clients to feel like they're part of the team. And so it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, but it really is important. So I'll give you a couple of examples of that. So as I said, we have government clients. So we do it with government clients. It's hard, but we do it with government
Mm,
clients. So we help them understand how the industry works, what are the drivers, and so they can make better decisions on their land holdings. And over time, it gets easier. We have seniors clients. So we do it with our seniors clients. But the big one is First Nations. So we're doing quite a bit of work with First Nations. And our approach there is one to not assume we know everything. So not come in and say, here's how it's done. Here's how it will be done on your project. It's to first listen and learn, because Indigenous communities operate under a different operating system set of rules than we do.
mhm.
And we need to understand and learn from that, firstly. The objectives and the aspirations are also quite different. One tangible example is we think in like 5 and 10 year IRRs, right? What's the internal rate of return for a 10-year project? Like we think in 200 years, not 10 years. Like we're very long-term thinking.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit of an education, but then most importantly, what is really key to our approach is the capacity building. So what we would continue to like to do is to help build capacity such that Indigenous groups and nations and individuals get more and more knowledge about real estate development and strategy, and can take on bigger and bolder projects themselves, rather than us sort of saying, okay, we're coming in and we're taking care of this whole thing over here, and it's a gated community, we don't let you in. That's really kind of the polar opposite to what we're trying to do. So we're trying to, whether it's with the First Nation or with a nonprofit or with any other group, we're trying to build capacity and allow that knowledge transfer to happen, and then hope that in future generations, the extent to which there's knowledge and capacity in the system is tenfold what it was when we got involved.
Yeah. I love it. That is so interesting. And one of the things that sort of hit me is that there's two things. Number one is like really listen first, right? What are their needs? What are their goals? And you really what I surmise from that is just very purpose driven. So there's the purpose, and then okay, well, how do we get there, right? So that's one thing that's really interesting. And that whole thinking from a generational sort of a bigger thinking standpoint of like, oh, how is this going to impact, and what's
Yeah.
the bigger picture of this, and then how do we get there versus, okay, we're just here to build a building, right? Like that's so interesting to hear you say that. Want to just jump in real quick, just because I looked, you guys worked on the project of the District Wharf in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Was
So
that
that was
your project or you
yeah.
part of it?
Yeah, I worked on that project. That was prior to forming Cadus, to be blunt. But I worked on that project as an advisor to a large Canadian institution that was investing in that project with a joint venture partner. And what was interesting about that is, again, slightly different approach. I like to do things a bit different. What often happens with advisors to institutions is a large financial pension fund or private equity fund or whatever it might be investing in a project hires a guy to go down and audit the project and the partner. So the guy goes down with a clipboard and sort of walks around and takes notes and doesn't really engage with anybody, or if he does engage, it's sort of in somewhat of an interview type manner, and comes back and reports to the capital partner on the risks of the project and the capability of the partner and the market conditions, all the things. And it's very much in a vacuum. So my approach was a little different. So I was working with a large institutional investor. They were doing the first development deal at risk with a new partner in this market. So there's a lot of risk around it. And they wanted someone that understood construction and development, and how to drive successful outcomes to go down to Washington, D.C. and meet with the team, and report back. And so on paper, the mandate looked fairly similar to sort of an audit.
Mhm.
What ended up happening was I went down to DC. I met with the entire team, and they said, "Who's this British guy from Canada that's parachuted in and telling us he knows something about development in Washington, D.C.? We've been doing this for 30 years. Like, who is this guy?" But it was about building trust so that you can get the right conversations to happen. So it took a bit of time, but the whole objective was build enough trust that you can share your impartial advice freely and they will listen, and they can share their concerns with you freely in a safe environment so you can actually solve them. And that project was highly successful, very, very big project, in the billions of dollars, lots of innovative things happening at the time. At the time, it was the largest waterfront project in the United States. Lots of money being invested and spent, so the stakes were really high. But we were talking about things like, you know, do we have the right characteristics of the team? Do we have people aligned around the right objectives? Do people have clarity why they're doing the job that they're doing? And they were silly questions to ask at the time of real estate executives that sort of said, "Of course we do. We've been doing this forever." But when you actually peel below the surface, they didn't have
Right.
necessarily all the right people or the right systems. Do you have the right relationship with your contractor? He's built for me before. Of course I do. Well, do you really? Because like we're seeing some things as outside parties that maybe are, we should be aware of. So our approach was quite different. I personally developed some really strong relationships and bonds through that I would say have lasted to this day as far as friendships. And we were able to put the clipboard down and actually have real conversations, um, inspire credibility that we knew what we were talking about, but also get to the root of the problem. And it was a great several years that I would sort of be back and forth down into Washington, D.C. Project got built in record time. It's a phenomenal destination. We ended up changing from a relationship and a roles strategy, quite a few things, including the different general contractors that were on the site. We ended up having multiple general contractors, and just great outcomes that, project I was really privileged to be part of, and I things that I love doing, where you're taking a very technical problem and you're bringing kind of human human strategies to it around how do people interact and how do they relate and how do they work together. And that's what, at the end of the day, that's what delivers really great outcomes when you bring that human element. And I think the construction industry and real estate is playing catch up on that a little bit. But when you do it, what's interesting to me is this notion that construction guys are all like hard-nosed, fist-pounding sort of meatheads is totally wrong. Like as soon as you start to have some of those conversations, the engagement that you get is really eye-opening, and it's a total pleasure to be part of that. And I just want more people to do it. So that's again coming back to the kind of capacity building we want to bring to the industry is have the tough conversations, and you might be surprised at the engagement that you get. And it ultimately leads to better outcomes.
Yeah, so it's interesting that it said when I saw that you'd built on that project because I was down there and I was wowed. And there's I've been to, I speak all over North America, and being on that district wharf was like there is a vibe down there. It is
Yeah.
just it is very original, very unique, and it has its own feel that I've ever felt anywhere. There's some magic down there. So kudos for doing that. And I look back to what you said earlier, when you broke it down to vision, credibility, and authenticity.
Mhm.
Um, that just to me that just makes sense.
Yeah, and I think what's coming back to our mission statement at Cadus is some people put those projects into a proposal to just demonstrate how great they are. Okay,
Mm,
you've done all these things. What we do is say, like, whether it's $1 billion project or a $3 million community center, there are things that you can learn from one to the other in both directions, frankly. And what we want to do is to bring the best pieces of the experience that we've seen on all the projects we've been involved in around the world to every project that we do, if that's a small project or a big project. But when we're dealing with big developers, we have projects ranging from $3 million to 300 million within Cadus. And some of the bigger projects struggle with like, how do I create a sense of community, right? Or I might have a not-for-profit partner and I'm struggling to like make decisions and work together. So we bring our experience in working with very small not-for-profits to
mhm.
massive projects, and we say, listen, you need to like change the way you're approaching it. And then vice versa, we bring projects like the Wharf where they've done incredible placemaking. Like they've really created a vibe, and the energy down there is awesome from what was basically like a derelict fish market.
Right.
And we bring it to a small project that maybe doesn't have access to that kind of insight. So they're very real, tangible things that we're trying to bring to projects and to clients to help. Ultimately, it's about making Canada a better place because we live here and we care about it
Mm.
and we're Canadians. And it's just, again, I feel very privileged to be able to draw on all these things because I've had a little dysfunctional life in terms of all the places I've been.
But it all comes together.
It
So,
all comes together. Yeah.
all right. So, the last question for you is, Justin, what's one lesson that you've learned along your journey that you would share, pass on to an entrepreneur starting a business today?
It's it's a very easy one. And it's quote unknown because someone said this to me and it was super impactful. And I'm regretting that I don't know who it was. But they said, you can do anything in life, you just can't do everything.
Mm.
And I have felt that throughout my life at times. And I think it's a balance between this, like the world is your oyster. You can do anything. Don't put any limitations on it. Just please don't try to do it all at once. It's like, right? Because you end up, and I think, the lesson I've taken away from times of my life is that, you know, doing too much can be destructive. And ultimately, it is playing the long game.
Mhm.
And so you can do anything you want. You can shoot for the stars, but you have to say no to things. You can't do everything.
Right.
And getting more disciplined around that is important. And having clarity around your values and what you're trying to drive to. And we're fortunate now, Cadus is at a point where we can say no to things that aren't aligned with our values, and it might be something that technically we could be quite good at, but we can't do everything because we have finite resources, and we want to create the maximum impact around the areas that we do care about, and so that those are the areas we're focused on. So yeah, you can't do you can do anything, you can't do everything.
Yeah. And I always say my line is, you can do anything, but you just can't do everything well.
Yeah, yeah, right. That's right. Yeah, yeah.
So
I will kill myself to try and do everything well. So my line is now like just say no to some
just say
things.
no. No, and no is a full sentence.
That's right.
No, no is a complete sentence. So, all right, I do have one last question for you. Sorry, I said that the one before was the last one, but my question to you, Justin, is if you were standing on a mountain and the whole world was intently listening to you, what would you say?
Uh, wow. Okay. Um, I would say I would be maybe a little profound and philosophical, and I would say know that you are everything that you need to be, and yet you are not all that you can be.
Oh,
Sounds quite good, doesn't it?
that's very good, actually. Say that again. That is worth repeating.
Know that you are everything that you need to be,
Yeah.
but you are not yet all that you can be. And so you are your authentic self. You have everything you
Yeah.
need. It's in there. But what you can do with it is limitless.
Right.
And that's I honestly I just made that up on the spot right now, but I'm kind of liking that. I'm gonna go home and write that down. I do think that's how I feel about life right now.
Yeah.
And with kids and my family and things, I think, we have what we need inside. And that's certainly going through your session, that's what I took away from it. And it changed my life. I've
Hmm.
said that to you in the past. Like it really did change my life. It's in us. What we are is there, and
Hmm.
it's everything we need.
Yeah. I love it. That is powerful. That leaves a mark. So. So, Justin, I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for sharing your stories. I want to thank you for your vulnerability. That shows a lot of courage. And thank you for everything you're doing to better the pond. And I see how the work that you're doing is not it's clearly not about you, and it's not about Cadus. It's about working with people that will create generational impact. That's kind of what I walked away with. And there's two things that were really interesting, and as you were talking, is it's sort of this hard work, play the long game, be really grounded in what you do and do it well from your dad, right? And the risk taking, the passion, that let's take a chance, let's go make something happen, and let's push limits from your mom, and you've sort of packaged that together, and it's just kind of a really neat thing to how you're taking that and creating impact in the world. So thank you for that. So if anybody wants to find you, Justin, where can they go?
So you can go to kadusgroup.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Justin George. I do a lot on LinkedIn. I will respond to your message. Or you can email us at info@kadusgroup.com.
And we will get that in the show notes. So there you have it, folks. This is great. You know what? I had a great time with Justin George. I learned so much more about you. And again, I do in this time have to give out a bit again a shout out to Sue Hamid, your Tech Canada chair, because if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be here where we are today having this conversation. So we're gonna give her that. And so thank you for everything that you do. So, and this is Warren Barry, and I'm flocking off to take you beyond the pond to better the pond because we're better together. Thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you.